Hymns of the Church, number 66. Hymns of the Church, number 66. 391. There are several birds eyes in this song. We will not be observing.
Service tonight. Thankful for each one that came out here tonight, and I want to thank Brother Andy for being willing to share with us tonight. I know he is a little bit, I'm not sure if he's still uncertain about it, but I know he gave us some butterflies, but I'm thankful for his willingness to agree and share with us his life story. As you might recall, about 10 years ago, we kind of went through a series where most of the brethren here at that time shared their life story, so to speak, or what kind of significant events in their life, what led them to where they are, and thought it might be time to continue that somewhat. And just also another correction from the announcements this morning. It was announced that Sister Mildred had fallen, and and that's why she wasn't here this morning. The correction is she did not fall. Her back, she does have a sore back, and it was, I guess, causing her some discomfort, but she did not fall. So we just want to make that correction clear here this morning. I believe Ken and George both talked to her this afternoon, and that story is confirmed that she did not fall. So anyway, just a few thoughts tonight in opening on commitment a little bit. Commitment is something I've been thinking about somewhat lately. When it seems like in our day and age, commitment is something that we are in need of. What is commitment? Commitment is an agreement or a pledge to, it's a pledge that you make now to do something in the future. Maybe it's paying a certain, amount of money on something. If you take a mortgage for a house, you commit to the terms of that to make your payment every month. If you commit to an appointment with someone, you say, yes, I will be there. I will do that. A commitment is something that you must do or deal with that takes your time. Keeping an appointment, keeping a promise. We all have commitments in life. And this morning, what have you committed yourself to? Is maybe a question I would pose. What have you committed yourself to? In our fast-paced, rapidly changing lifestyle, it is getting harder and harder to find people who are willing to commit to something for an extended period of time. And maybe school teachers are a good example of that, which we have a very committed group of teachers that I'm very thankful for. But they commit themselves generally 18 months at a time, because generally they commit to a teaching school sometime before the end of the current school year, and that that's extended out for a period of time. And it's hard to find employees that are committed to your cause. And generally people are committed until something more exciting comes along, and then that commitment soon ends because there might be something that is more exciting or more interesting. So yeah, commitment. But commitment tonight is how society functions. That's how things get done. That is how long-term investments are made, by being committed to that cause. I want to read just Luke chapter 9, verses 57 to 62. And maybe this passage is a little bit out of context with what I've just been saying, but I think we can get the point here. And this is speaking of, I think, more of spiritual commitment, but the same principle can apply. And you see, these are the words of Jesus here. Luke 9, verse 57, and it came to pass that as they went the way, a certain man said unto him, Lord, I will follow thee whithersoever thou goest. And Jesus said unto him, Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. And he said unto another, Follow me. But he said, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. And Jesus said unto him, Let the dead bury their dead, but go thou and preach the kingdom of God. Another also said, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me go first to go bid them farewell, which are at home at my house. And Jesus said unto him, No man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. So we have here a man who came up to Jesus and said, Lord, I will follow you wherever you go. I'm with you. I'm in. I'm going to follow you. And Jesus said, that unlike the animals, I have no place to lay my head. I think Jesus was saying to him, are you sure you know what you're committing yourself to? You're leaving your comfortable lifestyle to follow me, and I don't even have a place to lay my head. I think we don't see that this particular man maybe backed out on him, but he said, do you know what you're committing yourself to? Jesus' way was not a way of comfort, was not the status quo. He was a nomad. And anyway, so that was the first man there. Then in 59 and 61, we have two other men that came up to him where Jesus invited them to follow him. And they said, yes, but. We see that here in these two times. The one said, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury. I'll follow you, but let me go first and bury my father. There in 61, the next one said, and also said, Lord, I will follow thee, but let me go and bid my family farewell. I think that's so often tonight when we're asked to make commitments, it's conditional. It's yes, but. And once again, it's difficult to have a long-term plan that way. So what does Jesus here have to say about commitment? Here in verse 62, he says, no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. He's basically saying, if you're committed, after you put your hand to the plow, after you've committed to what you're going to do, you don't look back. The commitment is a commitment. Like I said, I think Jesus is speaking specifically in a spiritual sense in this passage, but I think we can apply this practically as well. And could it be said here, I'm just kind of reading into this a little bit, but is it better to not commit at all than to commit and not follow through with your commitment. I think, and that's kind of where I'm at today. I think it's better to not commit at all than to commit and not follow through with your commitment. I think we need to be very careful to what we commit to and make sure that we have that we are serious about it. And if we commit to following Jesus, like the guy here in verse 57 did, if you say, Jesus, I'm going to follow you, well, consider what Jesus is doing and how he's living, and are we willing to then pattern ourselves after that? So some things to consider carefully. Consider carefully what you are doing before you commit to something. Number one, are you able to follow through with what you commit to? Number two, do you have the time to commit to that? Or consider within yourself, are you willing to commit to the time, regardless of what changes that may make in your lifestyle? And the things that we commit to, is it worth your time? Because commitments take time. There's no way around that. Is what you are committing to, I'm not proposing that it's not, but I think we need to consider, is the commitment worth your time? There's good things there's worthwhile things to commit to, and there's some things that are not worth our time. So consider that. And I'm speaking of commitments in general. You can put whatever commitment you want to in there. And secondly, don't commit to something out of an emotional response to a given situation. Does a person or project you are committing to, do they really need your help? Will you be a benefit or an asset to that, or will you not be? And the person or the thing that you're committing to, are they more important than the other folks, maybe specifically family or friends or church? Are they more important than the other folks who will have to sacrifice, like your family might have to sacrifice because you commit to something? So is what you're committing to more important than those who will have to sacrifice because of a commitment that you make? Maybe that's something to consider along the line of commitments. And thirdly, commit to things and projects that complement your calling and gifts that are given to you in your life. Maybe talents that you already have to share. If there's a commitment that can use what you have to offer, then maybe it's something very worthwhile to consider. How can I add to this? Or I do have something to add to that. No one person can do all things, but we all can do something. So commit to things and projects that complement your calling and gifts given to you in your life, and then you can be a very worthwhile asset to whatever you commit to. Invest in your commitments, and after you have committed to something, be all in. Show up when you said you're going to, and do what you said you're going to do, and you will be blessed, and be blessed by what you've committed to. So tonight, I think commitments are a good thing, but I think maybe sometimes we should be more sparing on our commitments than what we are. But when we do commit, be all in, and then give it all that you've got, and don't be scared to commit. We need committed people in this day and age. It's something that the world's lacking. It's something that I think that we even see in our communities that often we're lacking. But we need committed people. So just a few thoughts that have been rolling through my mind. And yeah, let's stand for a word of prayer. Brother John, would you want to lead us in a word of prayer? Let's stand.
Our Father in heaven, we approach you this evening, this beautiful evening. We thank you for the bitter rain we had last night. We thank you for the beautiful day we had today. And we thank you, Lord, for each one that came to this service this evening. We ask, Lord, your blessing would be on each one, especially Andy as he ministers to us this evening. We pray that you'll be with him. Give him the wisdom and strength to deal with the subject that he has before his own life. And we ask, Lord, that special blessing would be on him and his family. As he deals with this, we realize that we receive a blessing from his testimony as well. Thank you for his legacy, his faithfulness here to the church, and may each one of us support him in the future as well as this evening. We ask these blessings not that we're worthy, but in Jesus' worthy name we pray with thanksgiving for all things. Amen.
All right, you may be seated. Thank you, John. All right, this time we'll turn the time over to Brother Andy. I think I told him 35, 40 minutes or however long he feels like he needs to. God bless you.
Greetings this evening in Jesus' name. When I first got this message on the phone, it almost made me laugh because I thought, what do I have to share? And the more I got to thinking about it, I thought, well, I believe it would be good. And now since I'm hearing what some people are saying, well, I'm looking forward to some other ones sharing their testimony. And maybe these ones that had 10 years ago, it'd be time to hear them again. Probably quite a few people here don't remember what they had to say. I want to thank Brother Clinton for his devotions. That last verse there it says, no man putting his hand to the plow and looking back is fit for the kingdom of heaven. And I also had to think of that there's a couple verses in the Gospels there where Jesus said, "Sower went forth to sow seed, and some fell on stony ground, and it didn't take root." Well, I trust this evening that we're all taking root in the Word of God, and we're looking forward. And the older you get, you realize it's not that long between here and heaven. But first of all, I was born September 9, 1956, at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning. So I was about a half hour too late to make it for church. But I'm sure my mother had other plans that day. I was born at home, in the house. The address there to that place was Blaine, Pennsylvania. And that's not too far from here. In fact, if you go over 75 and go up past the Burns Valley Church, I'm not sure what that route is, but you follow that road on out, probably, I'm going to say 12, 15 miles, and you come to Blaine. And we were over there several times looking at the place that we had lived at. Anyhow, it was kind of south of Blaine, I think. First of all, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my ancestry so you know a little bit where I came from. And I think it was somewhere around the year of 1850 that 3 Brougher boys came from Germany to the U.S. 2 of them settled around Carlisle and Mechanicsburg, and the other one went farther west. And I'm not sure how far west he went. I don't know if he was just farther west in Pennsylvania, if he went on west, I don't know. But anyhow, the first one that I remember hearing about, and the reason I would have heard about him is because that is the lineage that I am from, was George Brougher. And I'm not sure if he'd have been one of the 2 that came over, or if he might have been a son. And I kind of think, as I was looking at the dates, that he probably was a son to one of the 2 that settled around Carlisle or Mechanicsburg. And if you get down to Carlisle, you'll run into a lot more Broughers, and a lot of them I don't even know. And I was looking online one time, and it seems like from Carlisle, Mechanicsburg, Harrisburg to York is where you'll find a number of them. And anyhow, this man, George Brougher, had 6 sons, and 2 of them, and I don't know if I even have them in order here, but one was Nathaniel and one was Robert. I think there was a Daniel and another George, but I'm not sure. And 2, I don't even remember the names. I know Dad told us their names one time, but I should have wrote it down. Now I can't ask him. But anyhow, Mom had a picture of Nathaniel, and I remember that picture. Dad was sowing, I don't know if it was wheat or barley or oats in the spring, but Nathaniel had stopped in to see him, which would have been his great uncle. And she had a picture of him there on this, sitting on the bags of this pickup truck. Robert was the one that we would have descended from, and we have a picture, Faye and I have a picture of him in our house, him and his wife, their wedding day, their wedding picture. Well, uh, this Robert Brougher had a son, Harry, which is my grandpa, or was my grandpa, no longer living. And next in line was another Robert Brougher, which was my dad. And then after that was me. But of course I had brothers too. But so that was the lineage, took it down to where I am. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about my grandpa, Harry Brougher. He was an only son, and he had one sister. He was very brilliant in school, went through high school, started through college, and anyhow he got with the wrong group and started to drink, and his dad made him quit. Probably the best thing that ever happened. Anyway, I don't even think he went a full year. I think he might have quit at Christmas that year. He was studying to be a lawyer, and you know, my life might be altogether different. Maybe I wouldn't even exist, I don't know. But anyway, so instead of going through college, he became a farmer. He was a man that was very heavy. I think they said at the peak of his weight, he was somewhere between 350 and 380. I don't remember him being that heavy. When he was about 50 or 55, he discovered he was diabetic. He went off of sugar, and they said the flesh just melted off of him. Just in a short time, he was very thin. And that's what I remember him. When I say very thin, I think for his size, he might have weighed 200 pounds. But anyhow, he was a very busy fellow. And like I said, he ended up being a farmer. I think he farmed the farm he lived on. Fed about 40 or 50 head of cattle. And then he done a lot of custom work. He done custom round baling back in those days. I don't know if you older brother remember the old Alice Chalmers round baler they had made back, in the 30s or 40s? He done a lot of custom baling with that thing. And Dad said they tied with wire, at least that machine he had did. And I think he said those bales were 100 to 120 pounds. They were hard to lift around. But a lot of people were probably looking for some hay to be baled because if they had any extra, they wanted to sell it. Well, then he also done custom thrashing. He had a steam engine that he used for the thrasher. And I remember one story about him one time. He was going through Carlisle, and you know how all the smoke would come out of that steam engine and hung up around the top of the buildings, and the police pulled him over and says, "You can't bring that thing through here." He said, "Well, then I'll have to shut it off right now because I can't back it up." I don't know if them old steam engines didn't have reverse or what, but anyhow, cop says, "Well, keep going, just don't come back through again." And then I think it was sometime later on where they get rid of that thing and got a full-type combine. Dad was here, I'd ask him what kind it was, but had a 10-foot head, which was a little unusual then because of their custom work, and they pulled it with their John Deere A, one-styled John Deere, is what they pulled that combine with. Well, they done custom silo filling. They had them old inch cutters. They set up the silos and horses and tractors hauling the loads. And wintertime, he done a lot of custom butchering. Dad said a lot of times they were going 2-3 times a week to butcher. And then the winter of 36, I don't know if you remember older ones talking about the deep snow. They had snow as deep as the fence post that winter. And Grandpa gets his old bobsled out, and I don't know if you know what a bobsled is. Anyhow, it's a pretty good long sled they pulled behind the horses, and he hooked it behind his mules, and he went around to some of the dairy farmers and gathered up their milk and took it to town. And then he would ask them, he would take orders, what he should get in town, and he would take stuff back to them on the way home. And I think he done that for about 6 weeks until the weather broke. And I asked Dad, I said, how in the world did he do all that work weighing 350 pounds or whatever he weighed? He said, well, it didn't seem like it slowed him down. And he said he was always on the move. He always had to have something to do. He said he just couldn't sit still. Well, maybe that was all good for that kind of weight, but anyhow, it seemed a little different. Then my grandpa on my mother's side, he was, his name was Harry too, but it's Harry Lichtenberger. And I don't know if any of you met Robert Lichtenberger, lived over here in Mongol Hill for a number of years. He would be a grandson to this Harry Lichtenberger. He'd have been one of the younger grandsons. He was one of my many cousins. And his dad would have been my mother's youngest brother. But anyhow, when I think of the name Lichtenberger, I have to think about what Paul C. said one time when Faye and I stopped in it to visit. And anyhow, Paul C. asked me what my mother's maiden name was, and I told him, "You're Lichtenberger." Well, I had a lot of lickings before, but I never got any burgers with them. Well, the next thing I got to say will be a little bit shocking, but Harry was 52 when he married my grandmother, and she was 19. During his single years, he would often get a train and said he would go west, either in the Midwest. I think it was either Indiana, Illinois, or Missouri, out in through there somewhere. And he would buy a pair of wild horses. And his occupation was, he was a horse trainer. And he would get these horses and hook them up to a buggy and train them on the way back to Pennsylvania. He'd bring them the whole way into Pennsylvania. When he get in here, he had them trained, and he would sell these horses. And I'm not sure how often he done that, but his occupation, even when he was home, was training horses. And they said whenever there was times in his life when he had both legs broke, had both arms broke, maybe not all at the same time, but he experienced that from breaking these horses. Anyhow, I think whenever his dad got to the place where he couldn't run the farm, then he stayed home to run the farm, and then he still trained horses. But there's where he met my grandmother. She took care of his parents. And, you know, back then, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but anyway, back then, you know, oftentimes they get married younger than what they do nowadays. It wasn't uncommon to hear of someone 17, 18 years old getting married. And I thought, she's 19, she probably thought she was missed. But anyway, another interesting thing is they had 10 children. And if I calculated correctly, I think he was born about 1868 and died in 1946, 10 years before I was born. And we also have a picture of his mother. In fact, we have a picture of the whole family, him and his wife and 10 children, and then a picture of his mother. And I don't know how to say how old she is, but I would say if he was born in 1868, why, 30s or 40s, early 40s. And so anyhow, it was kind of a unique situation. And my mother said one time when they were growing up one evening, it was raining, and he comes in with a little kitten from a wildcat. And anyhow, they raised this thing and grew up. That thing would lay in the cow stable just like a cat or a dog whenever they were milking. And at night, she said this thing would sit out on a fence post and scream, and they say their screams are very scary, blood-curdling screams. And she said when her and her sisters would hear this thing, well, they'd pull the covers up over their heads. But anyhow, then finally one time the thing left, disappeared, they didn't know where it was. They thought they seen him a couple times later. And but he was an interesting fellow. It seemed like I could tell a lot more stories. I could talk about him all evening almost. But anyway, there's a few things I remember of him. And I didn't mention anything about my grandmothers, but both of them, from when I knew them anyhow, they were good Christian women and anything you would want in a grandmother. As far as church life, they say my ancestry came from Luther. This year, Robert and Lizzie was his wife's name. Robert and Lizzie Brougher, that'd be my dad's grandparents, be my great-grandparents. They were Lutheran. But my grandfather, Harry, and his wife, Sarah, they didn't go to church for a number of years. I think Dad was 15 when they started going to church and became Christians and joined the Brethren Christ Church there in Carlisle. And Dad was Brethren Christ whenever he met my mother, and her mother and older sisters had went to a Brethren church close to the mountain there north of Mechanicsburg. Harry Lichtenberger, my grandfather on that side, another shocking thing about him, he was deaf. So he didn't go to church because he said he couldn't hear well. The thing I questioned about that was, well, why? My mother said he could read lips real good. She said if you looked at him and talked, she said you never thought he was deaf. And he could have sat somewhere where he could have seen the preacher for that matter, but for some reason he didn't go to church. And I was asking my one aunt about that, the oldest girl in the family. I said, do you think he died a saved man? Well, she never answered that. She never answered that question, and she said he liked whenever the church came out there for prayer meeting. And I think a lot of churches years ago used to do that. They would go into homes for prayer meetings. And it could be he liked the social life of that. Well, anyhow, we'll let that all in God's hands. I'd like to take a look at my parents here now. Robert and Ruth Brougher. Dad was born June 23, 1926. Mother was born October 25, 1929. Married June 18, 1948. Well, Dad was a hard worker. Some people thought maybe he was a little hard and stern, and I guess us children thought that too sometimes whenever we got whippings, but I had to think already. There probably was a lot of times when we should have had a whipping and didn't get it, so I guess it all got leveled out. And I can remember Dad, we also had our good times with Dad, and anyhow, there's times when him and us boys had our fun times together and laughed a lot together, and different things that come up over the years that I wouldn't mention here, but anyway, we had a good time, a good family life. And also, when I think of Dad, well, first of all, the influence of my parents, I think both of them had a lot to do with my life where I am today. And one thing, we were always at church on Sunday, and Dad always made sure that we were there on time. I don't know why, but for some reason we had to be the first ones there. And almost every time there's a service, we'd be driving in before any cars were there, and when long as some more would be coming in. And I don't ever remember going to prayer meeting in our younger years. For some reason, I didn't go to prayer meeting. We always had family devotions at home if we were there. And my parents were, for a number of years, they went to the Bible Brethren Church. And I was about 9 when they switched to the Mennonite Church. And after that, I can remember some prayer meetings, but not that many. Well, Dad was 86 when he died. And there's between 800 and 900 people that he's viewing. He knew a lot of people. He's friends with a lot of people. And I guess, too, probably 9 children would help bring some people in. But anyhow, he died in December of 1912, and Mother was 83, and she died 3 weeks after. I think it was 3 weeks to the day. He died the first day of December, and she died on the 22nd, I think. Okay, going back to my life story, born in Perry County. My full name is Andrew Nathan Brougher, and ever since I can remember, they always called me Andy. Except maybe when my mother was upset or a school teacher was upset, why, I would hear Andrew Nathan. Well, I knew then it was time to look what they wanted and pay attention. Well, I had, for the first number of years, 5 siblings, 2 sisters and 3 brothers. And I think there was about 6 or 8 years between my youngest, the sister younger than me, because I was in the 5th one. And 1 sister younger than me, and then later on there was 3 more sisters born, which I'm about maybe 7 years older. 7 years older than Becky, 9 years older than Martha, and 13 years older than Rachel. So, ended up being 9 of us altogether. Well, in the spring of 1957, after I was born, Dad moved from the farm he was on in Perry County to Carlisle. And I don't know if you older brother remember where Peterman's farm machinery was in Carlisle. They had Massey Ferguson, maybe Alice Chalmers for a while. Anyway, right where that building set, it might have been a little bit off from the front, but there was a road went off of 641 out to Boiling Springs. Dad rented a farm along that road and a couple miles out, and that's where we moved to and lived there for 4 years. And because I was 4 when I moved away there, and that's something I can still remember. A few things that took place at that farm, but there was one thing I wanted to say too. Different people told me already I have a very good memory, and I tell them, well, I think I remember a time when everything was dark before I seen daylight. Well, they don't want to believe me on that one, so we'll just let that go. But anyway, after we lived at that farm, Dad moved to Adams County, where we lived for about 8 years, and then to York County, where I lived the rest of my time at my parents' home until I was 20. Dad and Mom lived at that last place there 39 years before they moved to a little house close to my sister where she could look after them. That's where they spent their last 2 years. If anybody has any questions or anything you want to ask us to go along here, just feel free to do so. About whatever. Anyhow, but I want to look here now at my school days. You know, I went to a Christian school all the time that I went to school, all my school days. And as I look back, I give a lot of credit to the school teachers for the spiritual influence and help I got from school. Even though if I was to want to grade these teachers on how they were academically, I wouldn't say they were all the same, but when it comes to teaching Bible, I think they all done a good job. I forget just exactly how it was in first grade. We probably had little phrases of Bible verses that we learned, but I remember in second grade we learned Psalms 23, and then James 1, and I'll tell you what, there's some verses in James 1 can be a mouthful for second graders, but we got through it. And I remember one time when that there one verse there in James 1 verse 5. I might have to almost turn to that to get it. And this Bible here's a little hard to find what I want, but it does have bigger words. Oh, I know what it was. If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God to give it to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it will be given him. Well, in second grade, I forgot to ask for wisdom. And I struggled with that verse, and teacher had charts on the wall where if we said our verse and said it right, we'd get a gold star, and they put it on that chart. Well, I ended up getting a green star that day, and green's a good color, don't get me wrong, depending on what you're thinking about. I think Green's probably the best. But anyway, that old green star on that chart, just like a sore thumb all the rest of the time the chart was up there. Well, also at school we had, other than Bible memory, we had Bible class at times, and I forget what year that would have started, but mostly the upper grades we had a Bible class besides Bible memory. And I'll just say one more thing here about my dad in relation to school years. First of all, he never liked snow. And one reason why is because he says when him and Mom first got married, that first winter, they went to prayer meeting one evening, and he said, maybe this is why I didn't go to prayer meeting much, I don't know. He said when they got to church, the sky was clear, the stars were out, and while they were sitting in church, he said all of a sudden a storm hit. He said you could see snow hitting the windows, and he said it was really coming down. And I think he said they had close to a foot of snow. Church was over, and I can't believe it was quite that much, but anyhow, he said it was a pile of snow. And they didn't quite get home that night. They had about 2 miles to go, and they had to walk to my grandpa's place. And anyhow, they spent the night there, and then the next morning he takes that old John Deere A over to milk his cows. He had a few cows there. He milked 8 or 9 at that time, where they had lived. And anyhow, he never cared for snow. So one thing we could expect when we were children in school and it started to snow, Dad never waited for him to call off school. It wouldn't be long till we would see him coming down the road. He would always get his station wagon out and put the chains on, and he'd be after us. Well, but things sometimes at that age are a blessing, turn out to be a disaster later. Whenever we get older, and 16, 18 years old, and even 19, if it was snowing and we wanted to go somewhere, he didn't want to let us go, and sometimes that got into some arguments. But anyway, that was a little bit the way it was whenever it come to snow. Now I'd like to look at some of the years at home during school years. My 2 closest brothers were Pete and Tom. Pete was 2 years older, Tom was 4 years older. And between the 3, I was what one didn't think of, the other one did. And I guess it got to be quite a case sometimes. I remember one year Mom planted a bunch of carrots. And you know these carrots, when they get a carrot on about that long, I mean, they're good and I mean they're sweet. We'd just go down the road picking these things out and take them out to the milk house and wash them off and eat them. And of course, we didn't know what Mom was going to say whenever she discovered it, but I could hardly believe it. One time we were at it was either a picnic or somewhere, something was going on, and I heard my mom telling the other lady she just can't grow carrots. Rabbits just take them right out and eat them. Well, I didn't say nothing, but I couldn't hardly believe that she didn't know any better than that. But I never could get a rabbit to eat a carrot. They'll eat the green top. And I know in books you'll see them eating carrots, but we would throw carrots into them, and they'd eat the green top off, and the carrot would lay there. Well, anyway, that's one time when we had long ears, I guess. But anyway, at home we had also had some sheep at our place, and another place that we farmed ground had heifers there. And the people living in the house had some sheep out in the little pasture, and they had a buck sheep that would you could really get him riled up. And we'd go over there to feed these heifers, and we'd get down to the sheep pen. There's a sliding door. Well, the sliding door was already partly open, but we'd slam her shut, bring it back open. That old buck sheep would hear, and he would look, and I mean, he would come running, and he'd be about 6 or 8 feet away, and he'd come clear off the ground and nail us. And we'd slam that door shut on him, and he did the door every time. Never learned his lesson. But one good thing, I found out we weren't the only ones teasing him. One time, some of the nephews to the people that lived in the house, and they had some trees out in this pasture. They had fence around them so that they couldn't eat the bark or anything. Well, he put a couple of them boys inside of one of them one day, and they were there about the whole afternoon till the people got home, and could pen the sheep up or take care of them anyhow. And then worse than that was their daughter-in-law had a garden at the place, and she was out, and all of a sudden, here's this buck sheep. I don't know how he got out, but here he was, and she had no protection, and she could tell that he was getting ready to charge, and she held that old pitchfork out, and he charged right into it. She said it's just stuck right in his head. Just about made her faint, but anyway, she managed to get it back out, and he left her alone. But then at home we had some sheep, and it was a little bit the same way there. We had an old manure spreader sitting in the pasture along the fence, and we'd jump inside the fence and holler and wave our hands, and this old buck sheep would come running, and we'd run for the manure spreader. An old manure spreader wasn't used, and we'd jump up on the front, the lowest part, and he would slam into the frame. But you know, he was another one. He just wouldn't learn. But we'd done that many a time, and never got hurt other than one time my brother went the other way and didn't make it over the fence, and the old buck sheep nailed him right in the upper part of the leg. He said, I want to tell you, that hurt for days. So we had a lot of fun over the years. And one thing, when my younger sisters were little, it seemed like Dad was very lenient. At least we thought so from what we remembered when we were young. And one evening, my grandmother was there, Dad's mother, and that was after Grandpa had already died. And her and Dad were sitting on the porch swing, and I was sitting there on the porch on the concrete, and my little sister, Rachel, she had a hold of the water hose spraying things here and there. All of a sudden, she held that hose in me. And I jumped up and yelled at her. And then she turns the hose in over Dad and Grandma. And I run for the spigot to shut it off. And Dad jumped up to go after her. And she just held that hose right in his face the whole way till he got a hold of her. And I like to tease her about that since we're older. She did not know what was coming because she hardly ever got whipped. And but I knew what was coming. I knew exactly what she was going to get. When I got the water shut off, about the time Dad got a hold of her, but she still blames me for getting that whipping. She said, if you wouldn't have hollered, she said it would have never happened. I said, well, you got to remember, you were the one with the water hose. Well, another story. Dad always liked to go to bed early. And one rainy day in June, 8 o'clock, he wanted everybody to go to bed. Of course, that's the last thing us boys wanted to hear, daylight out. So when we got there, we weren't very anxious to sleep, and I think it was my brother Tom looked out the window, and, hey, he said, the cows are out. We all looked out, and sure enough, they were getting out of the pasture they were in and headed up through another pasture, which we hadn't went around the fence that year yet, and we always liked to wait till that pasture was growed up enough we could make hay off of it to feed to the dry cows and heifers in the summertime. And anyhow, we soon were out and had them rounded up and fence fixed, but I'm sure that evening us boys were a lot happier than what Dad was. And the summer that I was 14, I helped a neighbor hauling haylage, wheat, tractor and wagon. And in fact, he had 2 John Deere 4020s. He had one on the blower at home and one on the chopper in the field. And we had to use this old Alice Chalmers WD-45 to haul the loads. And I got the job hauling the loads, and that only went about 12 miles an hour down the road, and we had about 3 or 4 miles from the one farm. And they were always waiting on me. It took some time to blow the haylage and took some time to run back and forth. He went along with the first load, and we were going down a hill, and they had a foot clutch and a hand clutch, and he threw this hand clutch forward, or back, I guess, because I think that was the opposite way of John Deere. Anyhow, coasted downhill. He says, now don't you do this. Well, that's the wrong thing to tell a 14-year-old. I think I've done it every time. Sometimes I think, man, I got to keep this thing going a little slower next time because it's bouncing up and down almost till I got to the bottom of the hill. But, then when I was 15, I started to work for another crop farmer in the area, and he had a few beef cattle and farmed a lot of ground, a lot of crops. And one experience I hadn't got at home was, or that I got at home was a lot big help there at that place. And I got a lot more experience there, and I even got a chance to run a string bean picker. I don't know if any of you know what the string bean picker looked like or not. Well, it was something different, so I enjoyed running it for a while, but after a while it gets very boring because you just creep down through the field. You can't put much throttle to it because if you put too much throttle to it, increase your fan speed, and you'd have beans going out the fan instead of just leaves. Well, anyhow, it was something different, and we would pick these beans, and they went up a chute and onto a cart, and then we dumped them over onto a trailer, and they went to Hanover Canning. And I remember one time, since there's some truckers here, I'll mention this. Don't have it written down, but I rode with him up there to Hanover Canning one evening with an old B61 Mack with 40-foot trailer full of beans. After he said, "Andy, look out there at that stack," and I looked out, fire coming out of that thing about like that. And I think your turbos now keep the fire from coming out of the engine. But that was interesting. And one other thing I wanted to mention too, that year I was helping that guy that hauled the haylage. I hauled wheat for him into the mill and tractor and wagon. And I couldn't believe it, but there at that mill, you could buy soda for 10 cents. Well, every load I get in there, I'd buy a soda. And if you drank it there, then you put your bottle back, and because I think it was 15, but if you put it back before you left, you didn't have to pay the extra nickel. And that's the lowest I can remember buying any sodas. Well, I was 15 when I became a Christian, gave my heart to the Lord, and soon after that, I started working for this farmer that farmed a lot of ground, and I'll tell you what, I faced some temptations there. Or maybe I should say a lot of static too. They tried to get me to smoke. Well, I did not consider that much of a temptation because my mother drove that far from me when I was a little fellow. We were playing one day, and I stuck a stick in my mouth like it was a cigarette, and I was walking around the house, and I don't know if I was 5 or 6 years old. And she looked out the kitchen window and seen me with this thing, and I looked the other way because I didn't think she'd see me. Well, till I got to the next door, she was standing there with a stick. Now, they'd got a stick off a potato crate about yay long, and she had that thing, and I got a good weapon right there. So I said she drove that far from me, but anyway, that old stick has some memories too. And my younger sister, next younger than me, took a purple crayon, painted that thing, or colored that thing purple one time. And we all said it stung a lot more after she done that. So anyway, we had our interesting times. Drink was another thing they wanted to tempt you with. And my boss, John Shear, even though he'd not profess anything, he was very much against drinking. And he wasn't ignorant of what the Bible had to say either. He said, the Bible means exactly what it says when it comes to strong drink. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging. Whosoever drinketh thereof is not wise. He said, just how it is. He said, anybody that drinks, they're not wise. And his parents had went to church. He never did. But he never stopped anybody that had anything there to drink either. They shouldn't have had. Biggest temptation was they tried to line me up with double dates. He had a boy close to my age. When him and his wife would both say, well, you're 16, you're old enough to date. Well, I knew what our standards were. And I never went along. I never, a couple times they lined up blind dates. Said, we got this girl all lined up for you. And I said, well, you can just call her and tell her I'm not going. But at that time, I had an interest in a girl in the district, and I didn't want to go. If I wouldn't have had that other interest, I don't know what I'd have done. Hopefully, I wouldn't have. But so they were some of the things I faced, but I did learn a lot there when it come to running equipment and different things we done there. Well, I wasn't always good. There was one time when the boss's boy comes in there one morning with a Budweiser hat on it, and thing come down around the side the whole way around, Budweiser written all over it. And I said, how far through York did you have to chase someone to get that hat? Well, that wasn't very nice, I guess, and he didn't like it, but I didn't like the hat either. And then another thing, while I was working there at that place, and Pete was busy, my brother was busy working for Mary Louise Grove, I'd been Kenny Grove's wife, and we seldom went to prayer meeting, hardly ever in the summertime. We had field work to do, we just stayed there and done it. And then one winter, into early spring, we got to about every prayer meeting that there was. And I told Pete one day, I said, well, I guess we'll soon be staying home when the field work starts. And Forrest Ogburn was our minister at that time, and he come to us one, I don't know if it was Sunday morning or maybe it was a prayer meeting evening, I don't know. I really appreciate the effort you boys have been putting forth to get the prayer meeting. Well, we didn't know what to say, because we were just talking about probably when you get there once the field work started. And he knew right when to inject that, I guess. Anyway, I don't remember what we done. I doubt we got there every time. We might have tried a little harder. Looking at our dating and married life, I was 18 in 1974. Faye was 18 in January of 75. We had our first date on a Sunday evening after she was 18. And while we were going together, in fact, I think it was February of 76 when they moved over to where Farron lives now. And one time when we were visiting with Paul C. and his wife, he said, how much time did that save you with him moving over there? Well, I said, about a half hour. I said, I usually figure an hour and a half to get to Path Valley. And I said, now I figure an hour to get to our place. Tell him to move again. That's a little bit the way Paul was. He is an interesting little fellow. Well, we went together all of 75 and 1976 till September 11 we were married. And September 11 was a good day to get married. It was sunny that day, and anyhow, just a nice day all around. We went to Yellowstone and back on our wedding trip, and I'll share one thing about Yellowstone. They told us when we went in the gates of Yellowstone on the eastern side, they said, you're going to go to your motel 2 hours north of here, and they said, it is cold up there, and you could have some icy roads. Well, there was no guardrails along those roads. Well, everybody was going like snails up through the mountains. I get out up there at where we were supposed to stay for the night. I couldn't believe it. We didn't even need a coat. And I guess they just warned you, so it did get cold, boy. And then, too, there, like I said, no guardrails. They probably didn't want you going very fast either. So they'd tell you it was icy. And we enjoyed the West very much. In fact, we were headed out through there. I told Faye, I said, I ought to just go in here to one of these farmers and ask them for a job. And call your parents and tell them to send their stuff out. I don't think they'd like that too good, but anyway, we didn't do it. Well, the first place we lived at was in a house trailer over here at Rodney Martin's. Go out here to the stop sign, make a left, up past the chicken house. Chicken house wasn't there then, but the first trailer behind, well, it wasn't quite behind the barn. We lived in for about 8 months. Now they got a double wide sitting there, I think. And then after that, we moved down the road to where that farm of Jonas Hoover owns now. Used to call it the old Jimmy Ghetto farm. Lester Martin was there before. I rented it, and I bought his cows. And the next year, I bought a few more cows, and I think after I bought the cows the second year, we milked around 40 or 45 there. And also, that wasn't a real big farm. I forget, tillage acreage was probably about 50 acres. And I had rented another 50 acres down north of Shippensburg on 170, along 174. A fellow by Ben Casper owned that ground. And also 20 acres over there beside Timber Hill, which I think Furlan may own that now. Anyway, it was a place to get started, and there we had 2 children, Cynthia and Sherwin. And then we were there 3 years, and then I rented a farm from Ben Musser in Mainsville. There we milked around 60 cows. It was at that place where I had severe back pain. I don't know, it seemed like it was a good bit, but anyhow, finally that 1 year come to an end. It just got that bad. Well, I ruptured a disc and I couldn't even stand up. And went to the hospital, ended up with a back surgery, and a year later I had another back surgery, which I think I might have been back at Newburgh at that second surgery. I do know I missed 2 years of deer hunting because it's right before deer season when I had these operations, and then I couldn't do nothing for a while. And you know, back then, when they cut you open. When I got awake from that first surgery, I just felt like they were on a chainsaw into me. Had a scar about like that. About 2 years later, my dad had an operation with what they call microsurgery. And they worked on 2 discs on him, and they only made an incision about like that. That was the difference. Well, anyhow, people told me I should never get it done. They said, you'll have back trouble the rest of your life. Well, I'll tell you what, after that second operation, I was good. And for many years, I didn't even pay much attention to it. I lifted as much as I ever did. And I think I was about 45 when started to flare up again, and that time they put me through some therapy, which done me real good, but I started to watch then too what I lifted. And anyway, back trouble was no fun. But anyhow, while we lived there at that farm, why, our son Jared was born, and then we moved back to that farm that Lorraine is now on there between Roxbury and Newburgh, where our 4th child, Jeanette, was born. Well, we lived there. And one thing I remember there was we had a big snowstorm, and I don't know if you know what that looks like coming into that place off of the Roxbury Road on Otterbein School Road, I believe it was. Well, I'll tell you, they had some pretty high banks there. They could plow that thing open, and I mean, overnight it would blow shut. And that 1 year when we had that big snow, or a couple snows, I forget what it was, but they didn't even bother opening it up. And I could take my 4-wheel drive pickup through the field and pick out the low spots and the drifts and get out to 641, and that worked pretty good. Anyhow, another thing we did back there was we raised some chickens together with Eugene and Nancy. You remember that, Eugene? Raised some chickens together, butchered them. Remember, we butchered them there in the house, or the wash house. Some nights we worked till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I forget how many chickens we had in there. We had a pretty good jag of them, made a nice amount of meat. And also, was there, after we put the hogs in, that we had so many of these old ruptured pigs we were allowed to butcher. And I remember you took a couple hams somewhere to get the Virginia cure. Do you remember that? Well, that ham was really good, but I'll tell you what, it was salty. And if you ate that for supper, you'd be sitting with a glass of water almost all evening. And, but anyhow, when we fixed that place up for pigs, for 250 sows, in the old barn we were able to fatten about 500 or 550, I forget exactly what we could hold in there. But I could never quite meet their goal for the pigs per sow they wanted per year. You're supposed to keep it above 9, and I could never quite get there. I think when they moved a bunch of gilts in for the first time around, which we averaged 8.7 on all the pigs that were fired at that time, which wasn't too bad for gilts, they said. I think we jumped to 8.9 the next year, and the third year was down to 8.7 again. But I think, looking back, one of the problems maybe was when they moved them young gilts in, and at first they brought in real nice, good size ones, you know, and wasn't long these gilts kept getting littler and littler and littler, and I think that probably had a lot to do with the production and my lack of experience. Well, it was also at that place where I spent 5 days in the hospital in isolation. Pig tore up my one finger, and I don't have a joint there anymore. And anyhow, I was in isolation because they couldn't figure out what infection was that I had. They didn't know what to treat it with. And finally they got something that worked there, although they still didn't know what kind of infection it was. But they told me, they said bites is one of the worst things you can get. They said they get human bites in at times that people get bad infection from. I said, you mean people actually bite each other? They said, yep, they do. I can't imagine it, but anyway. It's one thing my wife never tried to do to me, bite me. I never tried to bite her either. Anyhow, when I went in the hospital there, one day at the doctor, and he pulled this bandage off my finger, and the red streaks just come back through my arm. He said, if we don't get that taken care of right away, he said, you're going to lose that arm. And anyhow, I just drove my pickup over to the hospital and told Faye where it called Faye and told her where it was. And anyhow, they said to get me on a high enough level where I could take antibiotic through an IV, they had to give me shots, one in the leg muscle, one in each arm, and then another one in the hip. And that stuff was cold when they gave you the shot, and I'll tell you, did that ever burn? And they did the full four of them about 15 minutes apart, and every time it was starting to go away from the previous shot, they'd be coming through the door with another one. And Faye and the nurse were laughing at me because I'll tell you what, that wasn't very much fun. And anyhow, we get through it, and then they put me on an IV, and after I went out of the hospital, for 11 days, I had to go back there 3 times a day to get another IV. I think it was 6 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 10 at night. And yeah, it was quite an experience, but anyhow, glad when it was all over. And what happened, that infection just ate everything around the joint. It just went together like you'd welded it, the doctor said. And one time over here at Spring Ridge Road, I didn't get there yet, but anyhow, I was letting cows out, and I don't know what happened. I got my hand kind of wrapped up in the chain, and I thought the cow was going to make another joint, but got it out without being hurt. Well, in 1988, when we moved over here to Spring Ridge Road, where what was called the Hall and Love Farm at that time, and back to milking 55 or 60 cows. That fall, Dennis Grant, our stillborn, was born. Faye was 5 months along, and the doctors and nurses encouraged us to name and bury the child. And if he'd be living, he'd be about 34. We lived there about 8 years, and we were there while we had that 93 blizzard. Joe, I guess a lot of you old ones remember that, the 93 blizzard. There about the 20th of March. I mean, the wind just drove that snow. You couldn't even drive through it. You couldn't drive anything through it. And I knew the day before was really nice. You couldn't hardly believe it, there was going to be a storm. And that evening it started getting colder, and the wind came from the east, and I told the boys, I said, I think we are getting it. I got to wait the next morning, it's time to get up. And we went out and done the chores, and I said, well, we're at it, because it's already snowing. I said, we're going to get in the pickup. We're going to go back to Lurgan, where I had heifers, and we're going to feed these heifers. Get a pickup load of straw, because I was hauling straw back from there to bedding our cows there in the stable. And I almost didn't get back in the road with that straw, but we made it. It was right close home there, right below the house there, and I started to spinning. The one drift backed up a few times and got through, and snowed hard all that day. In fact, lightning and thunder too. I don't know if any of you remember that in that 93 blizzard. Lightning and thunder in there and late in the morning, I think. And it was different. Anyway, the next morning, the next day was Sunday. I think it was during the night there, Saturday evening or Saturday night at 12 o'clock, I looked out the window and you couldn't even hardly see the barn. You had to look hard to see it. And about 2 o'clock, I got awake and, well, it wasn't snowing as hard. I thought, well, maybe it'll soon quit. 4 o'clock, I got awake and it was snowing hard again. You could hardly see the barn. Plus the old alarm clock sitting there, it was starting, it just barely blinked. I thought, you know what, we might lose our electricity. I told Faye, I said, we're going out to milk right now. So me and the boys and Cynthia went out, and 6 o'clock we're all done, and everything was fine. Now, something I forgot Saturday evening, we were milking probably about, I don't know, I didn't milk 20 cows, and all of a sudden the pulse station shut off. And I looked all around to see if I could find a short to cut it off. Couldn't find anything, and called Whitmer's, and Bob said, well, I'll see if I can send the boys over. He said, they're going to have to come in snowmobiles. Well, just as I get done talking to him, they kicked back on the room, and we started milking. I thought about calling him and telling him. I thought, no, if it stopped once, it'll probably stop again. Well, we were just about done milking when they come up the driveway with 3 snowmobiles, Lynn and Rodney and trying to think who the third one was. Anyway, Durwood, I think. Anyway, we had to replace the whole modular out in the room there where the milker pump was. And I'm glad I had them come because that thing would have went bad once sooner or later there when if I wouldn't have done anything. Well, we finished milking that night, and Sunday morning it did stop snowing about 8 or 9 o'clock, and you couldn't even push it. You get the skid loader out, it just spin. You had to scoop the stuff everywhere you wanted, but we got the driveway cleaned out. But that was quite an experience. But a week later, see, that was about the 20th of March. So a week later, there wasn't even much there anymore. Had some snow here and there with where you had pals. Also, it was there where we had that real cold winter. I don't know if it was 94 or 95, but they were calling maybe 15 below zero. When I went out to milk the next morning, this thermometer was underneath the pole light. I walked over and looked, and I couldn't believe it. It was 22 below. I walked in the barn, and a couple of the water cups at the end were froze, and I got them thawed out. That was one morning I milked with gloves on. We didn't even hardly wash any of them. They were just about as clean as you could get them. Stuck the milkers on and milked. Anyhow, I was also there when I was ordained deacon at Calvary in '94, and Sherwin's first year out of school, and we were planning on doing a lot of things that fall together, and we were going to do a lot of hunting. Well, that really turned some stuff around because that was only 2 years after Pilgrim started, and I had that much stuff to do, and working on standards and visiting people that were coming for membership, and for some reason I missed hunting season. He got to go hunting, but I didn't. Or at least not very much. And also the last 93 and 95, we had 2 little girls born there, Trista and Randa. And Randa was first, and then Trista. And then in 1996, we moved to the place that we're at now. It sure was a big difference from living on a farm. And we sold mulch there for a while, probably up to 10 years. Built a greenhouse and had that about 4 years, and planned on keeping it longer, but we weren't really making much money at the greenhouse. And one night, it would get windy, and the wind took the plastic off. I said, well, I think that's our answer. But I don't know. I told my wife that sometimes I think maybe I ought to try it again. I think some things that I didn't realize then I could work at better now. Anyhow, it was this January of '97, when I had rented Enos Horse Farm over there, and we milked 90 to 100 head of cows, and milked there for about 3 years, till he decided he wanted to sell the farm, and milk had dropped to $10, and I decided I was done milking. Anyway, plus we were driving back and forth. That made a lot of driving, and it kept us very busy with what we had going on at home yet. And also in '97, in March, Davy was born, the last one in the family, and I always teased him he was the tail of the family. And now he's 26 and lives in Georgia. 2001, I started driving the truck for Carper. I spent 14 years in the truck driving different places and plus farming crops. Had a few cattle, and anyhow, there's times when I'd come home from delivering a load of concrete or something else and have to jump in the dump truck and haul some mulch or go haul something else or go out to the field. Many a day I come home and went out the field and baled hay. And usually one of the boys would keep ahead of me and mow because we'd made about 300 acres of hay there for a while. Well, anyhow, in 2016, I had a stroke, and I didn't do any farming after that as far as tilling ground. Didn't even make hay that year. I had somebody else come in and make it. And but I made hay after that for several years till last year was the first I didn't. And I'll tell you what, I ever like not having to bale hay in the summertime. Don't really miss it. But anyway, I plan to sell tractors and equipment this year, and get something more my size for the garden. Well, when I had that stroke, I was in the hospital 3 weeks and 3 days. And after I was in there a week, I told the doctor I thought I might as well go home. I can do therapy at home. Well, he talked me into staying because he felt like I was one that would probably respond well to their therapy. And finally I agreed to, and I'm glad I did because they'd done stuff I'd have never thought about at home. There's times when they had me pick pegs out of a box and put them in a board like you did when you were in first grade. And but all of that had to do with the movement of your arm. And when I went out of the hospital there, I think I pretty much had my movement back. Weak as a cat, and it took some time to get your strength back. I tell you what, I remember one time, I'm not sure, a couple of years before I had that stroke, boys would be lifting weights, and I'd get down and lift weights too, you know, and I think they had 110 pounds with the bar, and I'd pick this thing up and take it up over my head 10 times in a row. Well, after that stroke, I couldn't even lift 60 pounds. And I think now I can lift 60 pounds from my waist, but I haven't tried now for a while, but I don't even know if I could get it over my head. Because I tell you what, it does make you weak. And anyhow, the doctor told me that after I was in there about 2 days, he come in there to talk one day, and he said, just kind of said it like this. It's up to you if you want to get better. I looked at him like, well, what do you mean? And he said, people that get strokes so often get depression. He said, when they get depressed, they can't help themselves, and we can't help them. Well, after I heard that, I done all I could to make things go. And one thing was interesting. One of the first things they done, a couple of days, a nurse come in and she'd take my hand and she'd move these fingers. And the doctor told me, he said, what that does, it tells your brain it's got to get to working. Same with my toes. Another nurse come in to do that. And that's just how some of them's jobs were. Some were working with the upper part of your body, some the lower. Anyway, till the first week I could get my hand up to my mouth. But it's amazing how fast you can get on to eating with your left hand if you have to. And One thing I'm very fortunate of, it didn't affect my thinking at all. I knew what was going on the whole time. Didn't hurt my speech much. It was a little slurry there for a while, but anyway, I am just glad that I got back everything I did, and at least I can get around. Well, it's either 98 or 99, I get the notice from the hospital in the mail that they would like if I would serve as a chaplain on call. And I signed up for 2 nights a month. At first, done that for several years, and then I went back to 1 night a month. And had some interesting experiences going in there, talking to people, and I think we helped some people. One lady, I don't forget this night, I got the phone call, I don't even know what time it was. Sometime in the middle of the night, we didn't feel like getting out of bed. And I guess my wife, she usually went along with the lady, but that time she didn't want to go along, and I didn't make her get out. I don't know if we were away or what, because I sure didn't feel like going in. And I went in there, and anyhow, they told me this woman wanted to see a chaplain. So I prayed for her, and then I think her name is Marie, I'm not sure. And I said, "Are you a Christian?" She shook her head no. She had a thing down her, tube down her nose and mouth, couldn't talk. I said, "You want to be?" She shook her head yes. So I told her to repeat after me the words that I said. Asked her to ask God to forgive her sins and Jesus to come into her heart. And you know, after she done that, the tears just rolled down her cheeks. Anyhow, she had, what would you say her trouble was, Faye? Is something in her breathing. I don't know if she ended up in pneumonia there or not, but she didn't get better. We thought she might, but she didn't. She died. But anyway, she asked me one evening I was in there. Faye had been in during the day a couple times. What this thing was my wife wore on her head. And I told her. I said, "We'll talk about that when you get better. But you know, if we had to do over, I think we'd have put a veil on her." Also, the bishop said that time, he said, "I think we should have baptized her." Well, I guess you can learn from one experience. And also another time I went in there and this man was unconscious. And anyhow, I asked his mother, she was sitting there, I said, "What's his problem?" Well, she had told me she was a Baptist lady. And she said, she ignored my question, said he was baptized and taken into church, I forget what year, like 40-something then. And she said, like some others, he fell away. Well, some Baptists won't say that either, but anyhow, that's what she told me. So after a bit, when she wasn't in there, a nurse came in, I asked the nurse, and she said, "Oh, he's a drunkard." She said we had to take part of his leg off one other time, and now they had to take more of the other one off. And anyhow, this man was laying there, which seemed like he was unconscious. But I put my arm on him, or hand on him, and prayed for him. And I felt like there was going to be no response whatsoever. They thought he'd die that night. I called him the next morning. They said he was awake, he was conscious, doing fine. So maybe sometimes a prayer helps when you don't think it will. And I went in to visit him, but he was a hard guy to talk to. You asked him how things were between him and the Lord. All good, just fine. And every question you'd ask him, that's how it was. Everything was just fine. Well, can't do much with a person like that, but anyway. That was a couple of experiences in the hospital, but there were some others that were touching and interesting times. You went in there, and then the nurse called you in, but the people didn't really want to stay when they heard you were coming. Anyway, so much for that. Well, all our children are married, and we presently got 24 grandchildren, 16 girls and 8 boys. And September 1 here this year will be 2 years that John Risser was killed. And just want to thank you all again for your support and your care over that time. And anyhow, it's 3 years here to the end of August that we started attending this church here, and we like it real good. We don't know where else we'd rather be. And anyhow, we enjoy working with you all. Enjoy your fellowship. And I had to think of a couple verses here. I looked them up. I'll just maybe read these verses quick. Genesis 17, talking about generations of people. And Genesis 17, verse 7. God was talking to Abraham here, and he says, "And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee." And I believe that's also for us today, if we were faithful to him. And also, Ecclesiastes 1:4, I'm not going to turn to that, but it says, "One generation passeth away and another cometh." And that's the way it's been for years, and as long as time continues, it'll still be that way. If time continues, there'll be a time when we won't be here. The younger generation will have to take over. And also in Joel chapter 1, verse 3, it says, and I think what this is referring to is to the judgment that God threatened on the children of Israel. And he says, "Tell ye your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation." Well, I think when it comes to what the work of Jesus Christ and what he has done for us, is that we look to him to guide and direct our life and pass it on to the coming generations.
Number 62. Hymns of the Church, number 62.
Well, thanks, Brother Andy, for sharing your story. I'm sure through all the ups and the downs and different twists and turns of life, you can say that God has been faithful. I know I knew your name ever since I can remember. I believe probably from associations with Mom in years past and all that. And but the last number of years, got to know you a lot better, and I do appreciate that, you and your wife's contribution to our congregation here. And yeah, thanks again. I'm not sure what else to say. God bless you for sharing. And any other announcements for this week or anything? So, all right. Well, thanks to each one for coming out tonight. Let's stand and be dismissed. And Brother Roger, would you want to lead us in a closing prayer?
Dear Father, we thank you for this time where we can come together and hear our brother's testimony. We pray that as we look back over life, we can see our life and hopefully we have seen growth from our mistakes. We understand that without you, we're nothing. As we look over our family and see how we've grown in you, to understand that we need to draw together to all have the same destination as we look to our heavenly Lord someday. And we just pray as we continue on in life, as we go from this place, we will come back again in a worshipful mind and have a need to help encourage one another along the way and to understand that brothers and sisters are something that we need to hold each other up and to understand through life and looking to you, that we all have the same idea in mind, that we will work for you in this earth until we see our time to leave it to our time in this precious name.
Amen. You're dismissed.